Past the hills and rivers wide, where wildflowers freely bloom. In this land with skies so open, where can our children play? In cities bustling bright and loud, cars and lights that never sleep, do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Mountains whisper ancient tales, forests sing in harmony. Will these wonders slip away? Where can our children play? Beyond the screens and towers tall, where dreams once were born and bred, do they carve new paths of joy? Where can our children play? Let's be stewards of this earth, guard the spaces wide and free. Do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Gagan, and I'm here on a podcast today, Poison Power. Jim Gagan is joining us, and I am so honored that Nash Singh, founder of Crimes Against Humanity from Cape Town, Africa, is joining us today. We're going to be talking about how Trump can have an impact in Africa, but more importantly, what Africa is saying about the United States with President Trump's second time as a president of the United States and what Africa is hoping to expect from President Trump. So, Nash, I'm honored. So, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about one, who you are, two, how you got started?
Hi, I'm really, really glad to be on this show. First, let me just say thank you to you guys for this opportunity. And yes, it's a very, very interesting topic. As far as how we started, back in about 2008, 2009, I started doing a lot of research. I was a normal business person doing my thing. I had two sort of automotive companies. It was really great at that time, until I started to go down the rabbit hole, as they call it these days. So I went down the rabbit hole. I'm a great researcher. It is something that I was pretty much born to do from about the age of about 7 years old. When other kids were out playing, I was the guy reading. Like nonstop. There was not much TV back in those days, so Yeah, so I'm from the old school, and as I went down the rabbit hole, I realized that we actually have a problem. The more you look at this world, the more it doesn't make sense, and that's where we come now to President Trump and his motto of like common sense. You know, like common sense is something that is completely void from this planet. If you think about it, if you look at most governments throughout the world, we have a lot of unexplainable things going on in this world, you know, like stuff that doesn't make sense. So, yeah, so
Right.
that's what sent me down that rabbit hole. And then I got introduced to some very, very interesting people who are doing great work in terms of research themselves. And I worked with a guy called, well, I worked with a lot of people, but one of the most prominent ones that I worked with is a guy called David Icke, who some of your, I'm not sure if any of your listeners would be familiar with David Icke or they would have seen him on Twitter, but he's a very controversial person. And he kind of helped to really open up the boundaries of my mind in terms of what we were witnessing. So I don't agree with everything he says, but it kind of opened me up to a lot of possibilities. In 2016, we literally, we actually conceptualized his tour, which is a world tour. It was called David Icke's World Tour. You know, I mean, it was the Worldwide Wake Up Tour. Sorry, and yeah, so in like 2016, we actually produced 8 events across Australia, New Zealand, and the USA. And in those events, he was talking about a pandemic that was going to be somehow released upon humanity, and that the purpose of this pandemic would be to like bring in a global vaccination program. And I can still remember standing there and just listening to people take a deep breath, and then some of them chuckling because they thought this is absolute nonsense, you know. Yeah, so like we worked with some really interesting people. John Perkins, who wrote the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. We are primarily events people, and we tour with these authors. And when you get to mix with these people on a long-term basis, a lot of what they're working on and their research, because we're promoting it, becomes part of ours. And I was placed in a very unique situation to work with some amazing people and to have a lot of different perspectives and then to formulate my own, because I'm an evidence-based person. As you know, in Crimes Against Humanity Tour, we worked with Dr. Richard Fleming, who is completely and totally science-based, you know. And yeah, so like that's what led me down that rabbit hole. And that's how we landed up with the Crimes Against Humanity Tour, because the moment that COVID started, we knew that this is something that we need to look into. And the more we looked into it, the more amazing people we met and the more information came to the fore that, I mean, I guess finally led to that indictment campaign that we started in terms of Crimes Against Humanity Tour. And of course, 10letters.org also, which like kind of like hooks into that with you guys, you know, like Jim, great work there. In trying to mobilize people to understand really, you know, I mean, what's going on in the world, how these things start, and who are the perpetrators of these world events. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and we're in South Africa now. I've taken the past couple of years off. Still doing a lot of research. We're working on our own book as well. So, yeah, so there's a lot of things happening.
Well, we look forward to seeing and reading that book. Jim and I actually met you on the Crimes Against Humanity tour when we were in Fort Myers, Florida. You were there with Dr. Fleming. And I think you were on your second tour because the first one was Tampa. Well, am I correct in saying that?
No, the first one was Fort Myers, actually. That was where we met you guys.
Yeah, so we then met you on the first tour, and then you ended up going around the United States before your departure back to Africa. And I remember when we did that event with Dr. Fleming in Charleston, Utah, here in my hometown, that you basically said, "Where is America in all of this?" Which is really what prompted you to show up in America saying, "Hey, where are you?" And quite honestly, I was, as an American, I was asking that same question myself, because I had seen so many people put their heads in the sand. But now that we're almost fast forward 5 years into this pandemic, however you want to talk about it, we have seen so many doctors here in the United States that have lost medical licenses, lost the ability to practice medicine. And even one right here in our home state, Dr. Kirk Moore, who the federal government is coming after him, who wants to put him in prison because he decided that, listen, I'm not going to give this so-called mRNA shot. I think all these parents were coming to him, and he, just in the fact that he was doing saline. But now that all the research is out, how many hundreds of lives could this doctor, how many did he save? And how many hundreds of thousands, if millions, as Dr. Fleming says, are now dead? My brother included. He did not have the shot. He got COVID, couldn't get the right medication. I'll give a call out to Dr. Pierre Corey and his work that he is also doing, as well as Dr. Richard Fleming. But he wrote the book, The War on Ivermectin. Ivermectin could have saved my brother's life. I know I got COVID. Jim got COVID. I actually started taking ivermectin right away. I had COVID for 2 hours. But it seems like it's everyone that is speaking up who they want to squash down. But I got to tell you, America has a comeback. Why? One is we have President Trump. And in a very near future, we are prayerful in the United States that Robert F. Kennedy is going to join him leading HHS here in America. But with that said, Jim, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, to the introduction of Nash and actually everything that's going on, or if you want to chime in when we're doing Q questions.
Yeah, I think I'm just interested to hear Nash's perspective because he's based out of South Africa. And I did a little bit of research on the Trump presidency last time and how I think Africa is sort of, at least the man on the street interviews seem to be sort of a 50-50. They either were optimistic or they weren't. I know there's concern about, if I can remember correctly, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which allows African countries to sell produce into the United States without being taxed in an effort to grow their export business and also probably stem the Chinese and Russian influence on the continent a little bit, but it's supposed to sunset this year. So I'm just sort of curious to hear how other parts of the world are receiving the news that Trump's back.
That's an interesting one. It's a very, very interesting one because I can give you a perspective of South Africa and actually Africa in general. So please remember that the very same media that is controlling the narratives in the USA have a large influence or are very, very, sort of like connected, to the media that we have here. So we have very similar narratives, obviously. I think it was Robert Kennedy yesterday in his hearing. He said that whatever President Trump says, has to be ridiculed, has to be. I'm not sure the words he used, but so that's the type of stance that the actual media takes. However, on the ground, there's a completely different story. So when you look at South Africa from a media perspective, there are headlines. I have some headlines here. The one says, Trump administration tells that he tells funded South Africa HIV/AIDS partners to stop work. Now, that's not true in terms of what's happening on the ground. But these are the types of headlines that you're going to find. Obviously, legacy media extends far beyond your borders. Unfortunately, if we do the research, which I've done a long time ago, the actual international media comes down to about 5 or 6 corporations, mega corporations that actually control these narratives. And we saw that at work in terms of COVID. And we see it right now in terms of President Trump. However, on the ground, we have a very, very positive, reaction. And I'll tell you where that stems from is that, yes, on the one hand, we've got business in terms of President Trump, in terms of him wanting to put America first, which is absolutely cool. I think that he sets an amazing example for other countries, because this is what all presidents should be doing. They shouldn't be serving agendas. So from that perspective, he's showing the world right now what a president is supposed to be doing, which is obviously put his homeland first. And in terms of what he's doing in America right now, there's a big buzz on the streets here about him looking into canceling or into abolishing, I think it was income tax, stuff like that, that has never been heard of in I don't think in like any country at the moment, So he's basically taking the world forward right now into an area that has never been gone into before, where he's trying to deregulate in terms of making things easier for businesses. At the same time, in terms of these grants, and I'm sure that you guys will see, quite a lot of this in the media, him like stopping aid, and then the media uses that to say that he's a bad person, but he's not stopping aid. He's actually just freezing it. And as the incoming president, he has absolutely every right to freeze those funds until he's sure that these funds are actually going to causes that align with his agenda. And at the same time, so then obviously media will then try and spin that in the most negative light. But at the same time, I think he's being very responsible, because in terms of the aid that comes from the United States to a lot of countries, and like we'll talk about Africa in actual, in like particular, there's a lot of corruption that happens on the way. So a large part of this aid is actually going to these organizations and really not being disseminated in the way that he probably would, where he'd be happy with that sort of thing, So in terms of systems, in terms of how that aid is being disseminated, in terms of, there's a lot of money coming into South Africa, I can tell you, in terms of like gender diversity. Now, he's like stopped that in the USA. He has every right to say that he won't support it in South Africa. Why should he, So yeah, so in terms of South Africa, yes, in the media, you've got a very negative light being spun. Right. But on the ground, I think a lot of people are very, very carefully watching what is happening in the USA and then wondering, why can't this happen in my country? Why can't we have freedom? Why can't we have a president that can actually speak up for us and for the common people, and who actually tries to, he's already got, I think, several trillion, several trillion in terms of investments in the USA right now, which is very interesting in just a week in office. So why don't we have these things happening in other countries? It shows the actual ineptitude of the other presidents in a lot of countries worldwide, including especially Africa.
Right. Those are really great comments. Nash, so what expectations do you think that the African leaders and business communities have for President Trump's second term?
Well, of course, they would be hoping to secure trade agreements. They would be hoping to secure more funding and obviously more aid, which I think is really up to them in terms of actually if their policies actually align with his. I think there's a lot of fear right now because President Trump has kind of not had many friends in Africa as such, in terms of the fact that he's sold to us as a kind of like right-wing conservative person who is a lot of things that he's not. Like if you had to meet him personally, which I haven't, but I think I've read enough about his work, about his life, to actually know exactly who he is. He's not the person that they're selling to be. So, like, obviously, these leaders are going to be hoping for a whole lot of handouts, and that's not going to happen with President Trump. You have to show that you're actually adding value in some way in terms of the world that he's trying to build, and then I'm sure he'll get behind you. Right now there's a scare about the fact that he won't fund the actual AIDS program here anymore. I was just doing some research just now because you sent me those questions. it's like very, very interesting. But the US actually contributes to about, I think it's about 17% of the actual AIDS programs that are going on in South Africa right now. So if you look at that, then you look at, there's a whole lot of aid going in terms of like gender inequality, in terms of transgender sort of ideology and things like that. I would say to the president, absolutely, you can cancel all those DEI sort of like programs in South Africa, because we don't need that. In the same way that we don't need it in the, like in the USA, you know, and instead redirect those funds into like AIDS research, you know, into trying to sort these problems out that actually helps the man on the street, and is not part of some sort of woke ideology that we all absolutely see no value in, you know.
Right. And, helping the man on the street. I mean, for me, being an American citizen, I mean, at the end of Biden's term, I had to tell you, it was not only disgusting, but disappointing. It's just like, oh my gosh, here we are, Americans, but we're forcing Americans, we're crushing them down because you don't have the freedom of speech. And if you do, you're being censored, or your podcasts are being taken down. I have to say, as an American, one of the things that I appreciate most in what he's doing is not only making America strong again, but putting America first. And then as he evaluates, like with the money that is going out from the federal government to these other countries, what are they going to be doing? I mean, certainly we don't want $50 million going to a foreign country, thank God it's not Africa, to be used for condoms, because we know that they're making condom bombs. But as an American who pays taxes, that's not what I want my tax money to go to, nor do I think any other American out there. But with that said, Jim, go ahead, and I'll let you chime in before I ask the next question.
Well, I just wanted to ask, Nash, I'm assuming it made the rounds in Africa, but apparently, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher his name, but former President Uhuru of Kenya recently came out and basically told the other African leaders, I think he was in Mombasa, to stop crying that they're not getting aid. Figure it out for yourself. And I think what I see with, from an American perspective is we've had some pretty bad natural disasters this year. We had hurricanes, fires that burned LA down. You had a hurricane that basically wiped parts of North Carolina right off the map. And yet I didn't see anything in the media, because I don't think there was anything to report on of countries sending American aid or America aid. The people in North Carolina could have used it. The people in Hawaii and Lahaina with their fire, they certainly could have used it. And from an American perspective, one of the issues that I hear quite a bit is, oh, we're going to send $100 billion to the Ukraine, or we're going to spend $50 million buying condoms in Gaza. And yet we gave $700 checks to people that couldn't even apply for the aid in America to those disaster zones because they didn't have internet. So they didn't have electricity. And that was America's response to their own issues. So I think Trump tapped into that. And I think most Americans are trying to understand, if we don't take care of our own house, how do you expect us to clean up the rest of the neighborhood?
Absolutely. Yes, I did hear about the Kenyan president, and he's absolutely right. Exactly as you said, we all have economies. We all have huge budgets in terms of government spending. And I think if every president did exactly what President Trump is doing, we'd be all more sort of self-sufficient, At the same time, we have a lot of corruption in government, in Africa, in a lot of third world countries, not only in Africa. And we have a lot of money that goes, how shall I say, going to causes and, with motives that we can't explain, So at the same time, I think we all need to clean house. We should all be doing exactly what President Trump is doing, is to put his own country first. Yes, I can totally agree with you. To actually give an American citizen $700, and then you're giving like 100 million per time to a country like Ukraine. At the same time, I must also point this out, that a lot of the money that is given as aid is not actually given to the country per se. Okay, for example, those condoms would have been made by an American, I'm sure, multinational company, and then sent to Gaza. So then who makes the profit on that? It's an American company. If you look at I'm not sure if it's still on there, but on the actual website, I actually had it up in front of me. I think about 80% of the aid that is given to other countries is going via some American multinational corporation. And it's also to further foreign policy in these countries. For some reason, America sees it as a huge part of the actual operation to try to make sure that they have influence on the actual policies of these foreign countries. So at the same time, this aid, it then gives them this sort of like leverage, in terms of these governments. At the same time, with President Trump stopping it right now, there's a great underlying blessing here at the same time for these countries, in terms of Africa especially, is that when he stops, in terms of he's freezing it at the moment for 90 days, but it will give these people some time to actually reflect in these 90 days as to what happens to that money, as to exactly how it's being used, and then exactly how we can try and actually come up with this money ourselves. Exactly as I said earlier on, in terms of the AIDS program that is running in South Africa, only 17% of the money comes from US aid. And the rest of that percentage goes to the African government and then to the private sector. So I think that people need to come to the party for their countries. Exactly what he's doing for his country. I'm sure our private sector can also step up a little bit. In terms of medical insurance, I think yesterday at the hearing with like Bobby Kennedy, he was talking about Medicaid and about those various programs that you guys have got in the USA. We've got similar here, but except that this is more, it is totally run by the private sector, and it's very expensive, So billions and billions of like South African rands gets made through these health organizations, and they could actually reinvest some of that money in this actual country itself, because a lot of billionaires in South Africa actually invest outside of the country. So I think that is a great example in terms of showing people that if you believe in your country, and if you really, really want to build it up, and I think everybody should be taking a huge kind of lesson from what he's doing in the USA right now, which is basically invest in your own.
I also think that some of the issues that we had in this country that have come to light are, during the Biden administration, they were sending money to Gaza for trans education so that they could promote the trans agenda to people that, at least when ISIS was running around, were throwing those people up buildings. So I think there's a real disconnect with the Washington elites and the rest of the world that actually goes to work every day.
Absolutely. That's something that I wanted to touch on as well. I was doing some research just now, and there's a huge amount of money that comes to South Africa in terms of transgender kind of ideology and these clinics for these people, which if you lived in South Africa, transgenders and that sort of ideology is absolutely non-existent, and it's something in society, exactly as you said, there's a big disconnect here, is that we've got people starving and like we've got people who don't have jobs, but we are more sort of funding these ideologies that are more in line with the sort of like dystopian idea, like Klaus Schwab and the WEF and that sort of thing. So I think President Trump in his actions right now is going to expose a lot of things at the moment, and it's going to make people rethink how they've actually been kind of existing at the moment in this world of absolutely no reason, and there's absolutely like sort of like no logic to a lot of what we are doing at the moment,
Okay. So Nash, with the crimes against humanity and social media and also all of that stuff that you're also involved on trying to get the word out. What are you seeing there? I mean, do you see it like how we're censored in the United States? Do they just kind of have people in Africa as puppets if they're speaking up and out, not only against COVID, but other things like, Roundup and all the herbicides, well, I'll ask a question at the end about like Bill Gates and the vaccines, but what are you seeing there?
Well, in terms of how South Africa works, especially, yeah, I mean, we've got a political system exactly the same as you guys. However, not in like terms of left or right, but yeah, I mean, we've got various parties that actually dominate, and in terms of GMO crops and things like that, we've bought into a lot of these, how shall I say, poisons, yeah. So the whole concept that President Trump has brought in right now, in terms of what he's doing, is actually going to make a huge impact on Africa, especially because we've been fighting for a long, long time in terms of GMO crops. In terms of the fact, I mean, like I actually know people that are very, very involved in that sort of thing, and it's a huge fight where all our sort of like virgin seeds from, from South Africa were actually being destroyed. And if you use virgin seeds in this country, then there's a fine, so you've got to buy your seeds to Monsanto and things like that.
So can I ask you, I have a question. What do you mean being destroyed? Let's unpack that a little further. Like, do you mean being forced to destroy these precious seeds?
I'm going to give you an example. A friend of mine who is a permaculture specialist, he's an amazing, amazing guy. He actually, I think he's one of the only people to actually build a vegetable garden in the desert, up in Egypt. And he was growing vegetables there that absolutely don't grow in that part of the world. So he's very knowledgeable in terms of, in terms of virgin seeds and things like that. He was traveling with some seeds and he was caught at the airport with that, and they confiscated him. They actually like detained him. I think they confiscated the seeds. And then after that, they actually threatened him with a fine. I think he got away very, very narrowly from that. But it's basically that they don't promote you farming with these virgin seeds.
Wow.
Okay, because they want you to use their seeds, these GMO seeds. These are obviously better. So, and they actually
profits over people.
Exactly, but then it actually destroys the soil, after
Correct.
3 or 4 crops. You now have to rejuvenate the soil, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. You guys also, in like terms of farming, I think we all have a common interest. But yeah, but that's a big problem here. And I think that what President Trump is doing, like I said, it starts at the top. And like whatever he does in the USA is going to ripple through the whole world.
Right.
And in terms of Robert Kennedy, and I can't wait to get to that, because that's really the big thing here, is that if he can get into the HHS and if he can start to bring some of those changes into the USA, which are so sorely needed. We've spent quite a long time in the USA, a few times, we've eaten your food, we've lived there. And yeah, I can tell you something that he is absolutely right when he says that the food is just not up to standard in the USA. It's something that is very surprising. We all know the USA to be the greatest nation on earth. It has a tremendous economy, amazing people, amazing industry. You're funding a whole lot of the world and their economies as well. And at the same time, how can you not have healthy food to eat? It's just as simple as that, So in Africa, we've got exactly the same situation. We have all these GMO crops, creeping into the country. I think India took some steps towards that, tried to get that out of their country. And I think there was a lot of pushback there. And so is there over here. But it's not easy to do it if the USA is still subscribing to it, because in terms of genetically, modified stuff, it's coming out of the USA, and it's being imprinted on all these cultures. And a few generations from now, we wouldn't know what a decent plate of food is like,
No, and the U.S., we're the country that uses the most amount of Roundup. which is why America is sick. Would you say that in Africa that you see a lot of autoimmune ill health people just because so many of the crops are sick and sick from the soil and the spraying?
Absolutely. I mean, like, in terms of that, Laurie, it's actually very sad. In the last, I would say, let's say like 50 years, if you look at the deterioration of people's health, if you look at the outbreak of these autoimmune diseases, uh, and the way that it's impacted, I mean, like the whole country, in terms of this, we've got a whole lot of people becoming gluten intolerant. You've got a whole lot of people who are now lactose intolerant. And you've got all these problems stemming from these chemicals that are being used, as we all know. So, yeah, we've got the same problem. And I'm hoping and I'm praying and I'm sure worldwide right now, there are tons of people that are praying that like Robert Kennedy does get in there and he starts to do exactly the same review that President Trump is doing on the economy. He starts to go into that. It's going to be very interesting for the world because, as I said, all these poisons have actually found their way into other countries as well. And then, like, not to say that we don't have a huge resistance movement here against like against using all these chemicals. We have a huge emerging organic market, if you want to call it that, And as the populations get wiser, but what you also find is that these like safer alternatives actually cost more. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed as well, So in terms of like RFK getting into the HHS, we are praying for that because I think that any improvement in the USA is going to ripple right down throughout the world right now,
Right. Do you still see a big presence there with Bill Gates and, hey, these vaccines, will fix this? I mean, I know at one point in time there was some damage on some of the vaccines to women, HPV in particular. But what do you see? What are you seeing around Africa? Does he still have that presence and is he still pushing vaccines and playing on the people of Africa?
Okay, so in Africa, the actual culture of the African. Okay, so when we're talking about South Africa, we're speaking about a whole plethora of like different people. We have Chinese people here, Indians. I mean, like, we have a whole lot of white people, and we've got colored people, and a whole lot of others as well. So when you're addressing these types of issues in this country, we have to look at the different. In terms of like demographics, So like what you find is that the more how shall I say, the more educated people are the people that actually believe in the like science that Bill Gates, has brought up. I actually don't know what to call it, if it's science or not, However, at the same time, you've got you've got a huge amount of cultural people who have an innate distrust of the Western medical system. And that's been going on for a long, long time. It is actually something that, because we were exposing Bill Gates in this country, I think probably about 12 years ago already, and those vaccine programs that he was running, and then also the actual polio vaccine that they were experimenting with in like Rwanda and in the Congo, which is I think you'll probably, recognize it as the like DRC. So there were a lot of like vaccination sort of like experiments run in the African continent. And we've seen a lot of people get like injured. Obviously there was a lot of talk about AIDS being sparked off by those oral vaccines in terms of polio, So there's an innate distrust in terms of the common man on the street. However, among the elite and the more educated, the more sort of like opulent people in this country, unfortunately, they still do believe in that. However, in terms of a very interesting fact is that when COVID came out and the whole thing came to the vaccine part of the story, there were a lot of South Africans that actually did not take that vaccine. A huge amount of people that didn't take it, and then of course there's a lot of people that had to take it because of their jobs, because there were certain mandates from these companies and things like that. But yeah, there's always been a distrust. And right now, I think the world is waiting for the USA to actually expose that COVID pandemic, exactly what happened there. Like you said, I mean, I think we've all lost family members, we've all lost friends. And with President Trump coming into the presidency, I think one of the huge hopes for us all is that we have a proper investigation. Like into COVID, and the fact that Dr. Fauci received that pardon from President Biden is another red light that we cannot even imagine. I would have never saw that coming.
But Nash, because you headed up the Crimes Against Humanity tour, that doesn't necessarily remove him from international court. And you still have other countries, looking into it, Russia, Slovakia, other countries looking into these crimes that he did. So it doesn't prevent that. I mean, from him being, from him having a lawsuit, in international court, which actually could be better for the world because it would include other countries who want to be part of it. I mean,
Absolutely.
What would you say on that since you headed, that tour up, from Africa?
Absolutely. That's something that I've been looking into. I'm actually looking into the laws also that govern those pardons. There are a few different opinions on it, but at the same time, I think Dr. Fauci, whether he, has that pardon in the USA or not, I think that he needs to remember that, yes, there are many other countries that are looking into this, including South Africa. We have a huge movement here also that's investigating in terms of that. So, yeah, I don't think he's going to get away with it as such. And in the US courts as well, he can be called in as a witness. That pardon doesn't protect him from future crimes as well. He's lied to Congress on numerous occasions. And if he does that again, obviously he can be charged for that, or he can be incarcerated for that. As far as I'm concerned, I actually wrote I have not had a chance to actually speak to Dr. Fleming. I'm probably going to be speaking to him in a few days, but we're going to have a meeting about that as well. But Dr. Fauci is actually the actual least of our worries in terms of the COVID pandemic. In terms of the case that I helped from a sort of paralegal perspective, I did a lot of research there in that case. Basically, Dr. Fauci first started off on the right foot. At the beginning, you can find videos of him still saying, listen, masks, definitely don't work. He was basically blowing this off for exactly what it was at that time, And then I think we're the only ones who actually point this out. But I found a lot of evidence that Dr. Fauci then went into a meeting with some very powerful people. And the very next day, his complete tone changed from, hey, don't worry about masks. Now he was wearing a double mask,
Yes.
So there's a lot of things going on there. So I think that what happens with these things is that we focus on one person. If you look at Dr. Fleming's case as well, there's a whole plethora of people that are actually mentioned on there.
Right.
Francis Collins, Peter Daszak, there's a whole lot of these people. And at the same time, behind those people also, there were instructions coming in from some really, really powerful organizations in the USA. And I actually named those organizations in that case. So no, Dr. Fauci was not the problem. He's actually a great witness. As far as I'm concerned, if I had to be basically looking into a case in terms of him, I would actually use him as a witness because it was not actually him. He was taking orders from somebody else. I can prove that. And he was his whole tone changed after one specific meeting. This organization that I'm talking about, usually all their meetings are actually on their website. You can find all their videos, but that particular meeting, it was never put up on the website. So it was a top secret meeting. So yeah, so Dr. Fauci is probably, I would still like to take this up in the USA because I think this is exactly where it should first be addressed. Because a lot of the other people that are party to in terms of this crime are actually in the USA, And I think from there, then it should move to an international criminal court or to a court in another country where we can then incarcerate Dr. Fauci. But in terms of the USA, we don't actually need for him to do anything else but just be a witness.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. What are your feelings, your opinion? So we know that Roundup herbicide and other pesticides have been widely used in African agriculture, often with health and environmental concerns that we just talked about. So how can the MAHA, the Make American Healthy Again initiative, support Africa in transitioning to safer alternatives? How can the U.S. support? Obviously, you said there's an organization there that are clearly concerned about the chemical spraying that is going on. So much now, it's in our water system. And I actually did some water testing out here in Charleston, Utah, and found small amounts in the water that people are drinking. And there is no amount of glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, that is safe for anyone. And the U.S. actually allows more parts per million in someone's body than anywhere else in the world, UK and the EU in particular. But what are your hopes? What is your opinion? And how America and President Trump can work with Africa to also make Africa healthy again?
Absolutely. I think that just by getting, especially like Bobby Kennedy into the HHS, I think that's going to be a huge thing, because he's pledged. I think we all know that he's probably one of the most serious people you'll meet in terms of these topics,
Right.
So I think that any improvement in terms of legislation in the American perspective is going to basically ripple through the world. Okay, because a huge amount of what is actually going on in America is being sort of mirrored onto the rest of the world, or being projected onto the rest of the world. So I think that regulation needs to really be changed in terms of these chemicals. We need proper research in terms of the actual side effects of these types of chemicals. I mean, getting into the water system, like you just said, and into the food system. It's just amazing that if you look at the growing of maize, if you look at the regulation in the US in terms of introducing new ways of growing maize in terms of GMO and things like that, the actual regulation is actually almost non-existent in America as compared to Europe. And that's one of the reasons why we've got so much of these destructive GMO crops. These same thing needs to happen, is that in terms of certain things that actually slow business down, which is I think that President Trump has already tried to deregulate some of these things. But in terms of the poisons being used in our foods, I think we can all trust that the proper research will be done by sort of the HHS, if sort of Bobby Kennedy is there. And then that will lead to a whole lot of regulation, I think, in terms of upscaling regulation when it comes to food. I mean, maize is something that is a staple diet. I think in Africa, it is probably about 80% in terms of staple diet, And if you're getting GMO crops like that, and then on top of that, we're spraying them with glyphosate, why are we surprised that we have all these autoimmune diseases? I think yesterday that I think Robert Kennedy was asked about Lyme's disease,
Yes.
and about the fact that he said something about it's not a natural disease, or it could have come from a lab. Well, I totally agree with him on that, because Lyme's disease showed up in an area where these experiments were being done in the US. So I think that in terms of Bobby Kennedy and the role that he has to play with President Trump, this is why we saw a huge uptake of votes after Robert Kennedy came on board with the actual Trump train, because at that point, when I saw Robert Kennedy go in there, I thought, okay, well, now Trump has to win.
Yes.
No way we can lose,
It was my dream. I asked Jim. I'm like, it couldn't
Exactly.
have came to about, couldn't have come
Yeah,
together
and I think
better.
I think like the Lyme disease, which they're going to hang around his neck that he's insane.
Yes.
There's a pretty good clip from, I think, last year's WEF, where they had a scientist on who said, if our goal is to get people to quit eating red meat, we should probably look into the Lone Star tick and use that because it causes, in certain people, if they get bit by it, it will cause them to be allergic to red meat. And that's the kind of dark thinking that got us into where we are in the first place. And if you look at the vaccines, that they're also got to have 85 of them, fine. Go pull up the CNBC clip of an interview they did with Bill Gates where he says it's the best money he ever invested because he got a 20x return on his initial, I think it was $10 billion investment.
Yes.
I don't want to be anyone's guinea pig. And I also want to have enough autonomy to make my own choice about that if I want to take these drugs.
Exactly.
And I think that with Trump being in and, right now he's starting with, not allowing, some of the censoring that's going on. I mean, I know I can do a podcast with Dr. Fleming and, we'll mention the word COVID and we'll get banned off of some YouTube channels. And it's a big ordeal to get it back up and then they'll come back and say, well, he's a medical doctor. So you do have a right to mention that. But it's exactly what is happening is that if you can't get to the truth, which is really what happens, I think it's the disinformation and, a lot of doctors not giving informed consent. It's just horrible with what's going on, but we have to have our voices heard. And the voices have to be big enough so that it makes its way to Africa. And I think RFK will be very helpful for other countries like Africa. And hopefully we can make it more affordable. Listen, you don't have to eat organic on everything because you can choose off of the Clean 15 and other produce to be able to eat by supporting the local farmer and asking them, hey, listen, what are you doing for the weed control? Are you using any herbicides? Are there alternatives, which we know that there are. So I think RFK, Nash, going back to what you said, I think it's a perfect marriage. And I know that in America, there's so many of us just praying that they vote him in. And I know Big Pharma and Big Ag are really nervous right now and they're going to pressure him. I mean, look at yesterday, like you said, it's like, well, promise us for 4 years after, you're out of office that you can't take, any money. And then Jim kind of hit it on with, what was her name? Warren, the fake
Indian,
yeah.
American Indian, Elizabeth Warren, who will say and do anything she can to stay in power, but she took $822,000 for her presidential run, but she's only one of 22 senators that they know got money from Big Pharma, and a lot of them were beating the tar out of, or trying to. They just looked ridiculous. Bobby Kennedy wouldn't even let him talk, just gave a 5-minute speech about what a jerk he was.
Yeah.
So I think that the problem that the deep state has and these lifetime politicians have in our country is that people are now paying attention. They don't trust our government. They look at everything with a skeptical eye because they know they're not getting correct information from the media or even the internet. I use ChatGPT sometimes and was interested on how it might censor some of the information. So for today's podcast, I just asked it to generate an image of President Trump off to one side and the continent of Africa on the other side. And ChatGPT said it couldn't do that, but it would be happy to put up something on Africa. but it wouldn't allow Trump to be part of it because it might be used
Interesting.
for political or, I mean, who knows? All I asked it was what you're seeing on the screen, but then Elon Trump's AI just spit out 15 different iterations of it every time I asked. And it is the same thing that we seek, which is the Chinese GPT that was just released. If you asked it uncomfortable questions about President Xi, it wouldn't answer you, and it would tell you to ask something else. So I think censorship is still deeply built into a lot of this stuff. I know that we do need Kennedy to clean up our food because at least he'll advocate for the people and not for the big companies because he's not taking money from them. We went into Whole Foods, which is owned by Jeff Bezos and Amazon now, which used to be a pretty much all organic American store. And we were going to pick up a birthday cake for a friend. And when you read the, I don't know, 57 ingredient list for a cupcake, one of the last things it said was it contains bio engineered foods, which is a whole nother category in the US that we haven't had, which then you're like, well, what is it? I mean, what are they putting in there? Is it crickets? I mean, it's concerning.
Yes, it is.
And another thing, just to follow up with that, Jim, I mean, look at some of the stuff that they're starting to ban. The fluoride in water. We've known that fluoride is neurotoxic. Red dyes. I mean, I think one of the things that aggravates me the most, like California has all these like, hey, Prop 65, we're going to ban red dyes, yellow dyes, but they're spraying the most amount of glyphosate, and besides for Iowa, in Illinois, but in almost any state. And they label everything like, hey, this may cause cancer. Well, duh. Why don't you stop spraying the herbicides like cancer that the studies show that it is causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and making America sick?
But I think that went through. Prop 65 basically says that anything that is hazardous or carcinogenic or may cause harm has to be labeled or at least displayed in the store that this product, like if you go into a Starbucks, there's 3 or 4 on the wall in California that tell you that your latte is going to kill you. I think part of it was they allowed it through, and probably with good intention, the people that voted for it, but it's like crying wolf, from that whole fable. Everything's going to kill you is the joke out there, so those black box warnings don't mean anything.
Good point. Good point. So, Nash, as we get ready to wind down, I got a couple of last questions. So, do you have any opinions how Elon Musk can help Africa with what he's doing here in the U.S., Doge? But Jim was saying this morning that his family is from Cape Town. What's your opinion on Elon Musk?
Okay, so Elon has done a lot of good things in terms of Twitter, which is now X. Obviously, free speech is a huge thing. I think he's kind of catapulted in the minds of most people worldwide in terms of free speech. Remember that everything that happens in like America, people all watch from everywhere in the world because we don't have those things. We don't have free speech the way that you've got it there right now in terms of Twitter. So I think he's done some great things. I think he's a great contributor to this team. Like if you look at RFK, you look at President Trump, you look at some of the other people that are really amazing there. And then you've got Elon, and Elon Musk is a great businessman. I think we all can agree that he's very original. He will come out with ideas that most people think are totally impossible. However, that's a South African trait as well. Like we work very hard and we always try to do the best we can, So if somebody said to him, hey, you can't go to Mars, he'll be like, I'm going to get to Mars, Exactly the same as like people's told us, like you guys will never ever expose COVID and you'll never ever get to the bottom of it because there's just too many huge, powerful people involved. And we said, wait, and you just hold my beer, and we're still going, you know. So at the end of the day, I think Elon follows that tradition as a lot of, I think South African people, where we try to achieve the absolute maximum. And so far, it's worked for him very well. He's had some failures in the past as well, but that's cool because he's picked himself up. In terms of Doge, I think that takes it into a completely new, into a new dimension for the whole world. Because in which country do you have an organization or an institute that is actually watching what the government does? Now, if you think about it, that's common sense, because it shouldn't be the government watching the people. It should be the people watching the government.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we give them the power, you know. So I think Doge is a much needed sort of mechanism. And if he can do in America what I think he will do, which is, I think, really, really streamline things where there's like where there's no wasted expenditure, and like where he can start to put the people's money to work more sort of efficiently, then that's going to become a huge issue for the rest of the world, because I think other people are going to say, okay, so why can't we have that in our country, you know? So he doesn't even have to come to Africa, but just being from Africa, I think you're going to see a lot of movements worldwide coming up saying, we need a Doge in our government because these guys are just spending our money, and they can do whatever they want. They can spend it on transgenders when we've got people starving in the street, or we've just got a hurricane, and we've got people that are homeless at the moment and they're out in FEMA camps and stuff like that. I think that Elon Musk also, is a huge contribution to the common sense part of the Trump campaign. And I'm really proud of him, especially him being South African. Yeah. And I hope he does well with that, because that could be replicated worldwide. Absolutely.
Right. And hopefully helpful. So the last couple questions, more for you and Jim. So Crimes Against Humanity tour you started, which actually ended up, and you were here when it started, it led to a grassroots effort on having a voice to speak up for not only the deaths from the spike protein, the COVID shot. 10letters.org was born out of this in a way right now to give Americans a voice, to let their attorney generals and their governors know, like, listen, we're in our fifth year and we're not letting go of this. So, Jim, can you explain 10 letters? And Nash, can you then follow up with telling us how America can still assist in helping crimes against humanity not fall to the bottom of the list, how 10letters.org can support the crime against American citizens with the deaths and the autoimmunes, the vaccine injured, the long haul, but all the people around the world. So, Jim, can you explain that?
Yeah, so we had Nash and his beautiful wife, Nisha, out to Utah. We actually met him in Florida originally, and met Dr. Fleming, who was one of the early PhDs, MDs, JDs that were swinging at, or at least calling out through science, their concerns about the COVID vaccine. So he came out to talk in Utah as a favor to us, to a group of people that were sort of on the same page but didn't know what to do. And this was kind of the height of mandates. And one of the doctors that showed up brought a box of letters and said, hey, my wife did this. It's a letter asking the AGs in the in Utah at this time, the AG to actually take a look at this and maybe convene a grand jury. They suggested, they all thought it was a great idea, took the letter, signed their name to it, and sent it. But they also suggested that as they toured the country to do these events, that they should take a whole, truckload of these letters with them, which obviously wasn't going to work. So after talking a little bit, we decided to build a website that doesn't ask for any money. It's free to use. It will self-address a letter to your state's AG and to your governor, and it prints out a 16-page request to convene a grand jury to indict the people that were responsible, and it's signed by a bunch of world-class PhDs. It doesn't take a whole lot, but it's not an email. We actually want you to send the letter in because they have to physically deal with the letter. So imagine sitting in your AG office and every day 25 letters or 50 letters or 100 letters comes to your desk. It's sort of an untenable position for them to just ignore it. I think we sent close to 12,000 letters so far. We sent so many letters that certain states' AGs actually wrote us and asked us to stop because they didn't know what to do with all these letters. So we update it every time there's an election, but the 10 letters name came out of, hey, go do this. It takes 2 minutes. You can do it anonymously. You can edit the letter that's sent, but go out and do this. You can do it on your phone. Send the letter off, and then ask 10 of your friends to do the same thing. So if 1,000 people do it, but you can get 10 of your friends to do it, now you're 10,000. That one letter, causes a ripple effect. So that's where it is. It's still up and running. Dr. Fleming just wrote a book. It's got QR codes that actually take you to the site. Most of the information came out of the events that Nash and Nisha were running. And it's something to look at. It gives you a lot of information. There's actually a sworn deposition video that you can watch on the site as well from Dr. Richard Fleming. He wrote, is COVID-19 a bioweapon? And he also wrote, what's his new one? It's actually a pretty good book.
The eugenics. Are we the next? My gosh, I haven't read it. I've read it and put it down. Yeah. Are we the? I can't believe we don't know that between the three of us.
Well, I just read the book. I wasn't paying attention to the.
Are we the next generation? And he just basically lays it out where it started, Nazi war crimes, what they did back then, which then led to, Fauci and the orphanages and where we are actually today with, I guess for me, I'm shocked that we've gotten far, but Fauci is still walking as a free man, and now he's been pardoned for certain things, here in the United States. But I think even like the state of Idaho right now, can states go after?
So I found the titles. Dr. Fleming has written, I think, 23 books. You can get them on Amazon. Over a couple of decades, he was a nuclear cardiologist, has a PhD in physics. He is a JD, so he's got his law degree, and he has a handful of other degrees like in psychology and things like that. Very interesting guy, very bright. The last two books he wrote was Is COVID-19 a Bioweapon? A Scientific and Forensic Investigation, because he's very data-based. He actually was an editor for The Lancet at one point and stepped down from that prestigious position because he realized they were covering up some of the data on COVID. Then he just wrote, and it's fascinating, Are We the Next Endangered Species? Bioweapons, Eugenics, and More, which basically takes you through the history of how we got to funding biolabs in China.
Okay. So, Nash, what can we continue to do in America to help keep crimes against humanity in the forefront? And what would you like to say to the listeners who may have not been following crimes against humanity, not even knowing that you and Nisha, came all the way from South Africa saying, hey, where the heck is America? What would you like to close out with our audience?
Okay, first of all, we still have the website up and running. So It's actually crimes against humanity tour, okay, .com. So 10letters.org is it was a huge blessing, I think, because it got a lot of people to actually express exactly what we wanted, which is to actually do something in terms of what was happening regarding COVID and these vaccines and everything else. Yeah, so like Nisha and I came out to America. We did 10 conferences in 10 different locations, thanks to a lot of people, including yourselves. But I think the whole reason that we did that was to make people aware of the fact that a crime was being committed and that something has to be done about that. We can't, we live in 2024, 2025 now also, we just come into a new year. And in 2025, if you think about it, we should be a very modern and civilized and advanced, I think, civilization, compared to our sort of ancestors who were out in wagons, traveling across America, breaking new ground. Okay, now we get to jump into a jumbo jet and we can fly across the world in a few hours. I think what we need to do is to get Americans to realize that a lot of what the medical system is actually telling us needs to be analyzed very closely. People like Dr. Fleming actually lay that out in his books. In terms of Crimes Against Humanity tour, all we want to see is justice for all the people that have been damaged and for all the people that are still, I think, suffering from long COVID, who have still, who had other illnesses and then went to hospitals and then didn't get the treatment because these people closed the hospitals down. I think that's a major crime. I think it is most obvious that something has to be done. This can't be swept under the carpet. And now that President Trump is in office, I think it creates a perfect atmosphere for us to look into that. The fact that Dr. Fauci has a pardon has absolutely and totally nothing to do with the fact that a crime was committed and that, yes, he was a huge instrument when it came to the United States, but there's a whole lot of people that were involved in that. And in the case that we actually wrote out and that we have ready to go at the moment, we identify at least another 20 people that were involved in that, and that list still keeps expanding, So it's a crime that was committed against the world, against America. It was a crime that was committed against our freedoms and our freedom of speech as well, with all the censorship that we had. I think a lot of people that haven't heard of us is because of the censorship, the massive censorship that we encountered when we tried to do that tour. At the same time, what we want to see is people go to jail. And we have a mechanism for that. We have 10letters.org, which is a simple way to send letters to the AGs and the governors. And I think that that if anybody wants to help, as long as you get behind Dr. Fleming, you're actually getting behind us all, because we work very, closely with Dr. Fleming. He's about, I think, in my career, we've met a huge amount of celebrities. We've worked with a whole lot of people. And Dr. Fleming is one of the few people I can say has the most amount of integrity. And in terms of passion, it is absolutely endless, to get these things done. So I think we need to start putting people in jail. We need to, especially when RFK comes into office, I think he needs to be approached with these, with the details that we have. Dr. Fleming has got a few gigabytes of information, and yeah.
It's more than a few gigabytes of information now, Nash.
Yeah, thousands. You know what? We'll close out with this. So one of the questions and comments that I often make when I do these podcasts with Dr. Fleming is it's time for all of the medical doctors to take their boxing gloves off and unite. Peter McCullough, Malone, all of these doctors, even Dr. David Martin, who I like what he's doing as a PhD, but it seems like everybody wants to be the first to get to the finish line. But the problem is every doctor out there are still Americans and people all over the world that are dying on their dime. It's time for the doctors to unite. to say, hey, listen, maybe Dr. Fleming has some things that are right. Maybe Dr. Pierre Corey has some other things that are right. Maybe Dr. Peter McCullough, maybe Malone. Why can't they just come together for the people? And so I want to leave this podcast with that, because people in Africa are counting on these doctors to come together. Because you, as you well know, Nash, you showed up in America saying, where is America? I, as an American citizen, I'm saying, where is America? It's time to unite. Who cares who crosses the finish line? Why don't you do it together? Why don't you unite and do it together?
I absolutely second that. It is, I mean, like, I think it's time for a proper coalition of all these doctors to sit down and to find common ground in terms of what we've got, because we have a crime that's been committed, and we should forget about the details and all the minor differences. We need to do something about it, you know.
Right. So maybe that'd be good. Something for, crimes against humanity. Maybe we could unite these doctors and say, hey, listen, let's do it one more time. Let's do it for the people.
Absolutely.
I think there's a famous quote from President Harry S. Truman that said, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets credit for it.
Yes.
That's a great saying. That's a great way to leave this. So Nash, thank you very much. I'm very honored. I'm so happy that we got to see you. Please give our best and love to your beautiful wife, Nisha. And until we chat again, we look forward to, actually, I'll post the link at the bottom of our podcast to the Crimes Against Humanity tour. So if people want to reach out to you, we're hoping that we can come together as one world, and it actually starts with everybody. So thank you both for joining, and good night for now.
God bless you.
Thank you so much.